Hi, my name is Matthew Bellisario. Thanks for coming by the BellisarioSonic YouTube channel from the heart of the Deep South on the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama, where we talk about music, records, do record reviews, interviews, and more. Today, I'm happy to introduce you to a wonderful pianist, arranger, composer, educator, Bill O'Connell. We'll be talking about his new record here on the JoJo label, talking about his journey to becoming a jazz pianist and composer, all the great people he's played with, including Sonny Rollins. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. All right. Welcome to the BellisarioSonic YouTube channel. I'm very excited to have pianist, composer, arranger, educator, writer, Bill O'Connell with me.
All right, Matthew.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So I just want to do a little introduction for people that may not have kept up with your career, but you've done a lot of stuff here. You're born in New York originally, it looks like, and you started off in classical music. It looks like you studied that at Oberlin, and
Yeah, in a way. I mean, I studied with my uncle, who was a classical pianist, but he was also into pop music and sort of jazz too, and it's a pretty well-rounded guy. So I took lessons with him when I was like, 5 or something. So we did classical stuff and in the beginning, and some pop things too. Like he got me a boogie woogie book that I really loved. Andre Previn, I think, like what was it called? Like Young, maybe was that the name of the tune? I don't know. These certain tunes got me a little bit, sort of precursor to my future. But yeah, he was great, in that he was a really encouraging guy in terms of me pursuing music. So I studied with him through high school, and then went to Oberlin and studied composition there for a while, and met some other students who were heavy into jazz. My roommate came to Oberlin, and with all the Miles and Train records, back in, they were all vinyl then, in the 70s.
yeah, right.
And that was as much of my education as anything I learned at the school. So anyway.
It says that you studied with Richie Byrack as well, right?
Right. When I came, well, you were right. I grew up in New York, so moving into New York after Oberlin didn't really faze me because I was kind of familiar with the city. And yeah, I hooked up with Richie, and I would call him. Well, listen, my uncle was great, as a teacher, and I love him to death. But in terms of my future, I guess, musical influence, Richie was a tremendous teacher. And I think he has a legacy as a teacher also, because many people have studied with him in the past. So that was really a great experience.
Yeah, he's kind of he kind of gets out there. He's with Dave Liebman and those guys, and they kind of they kind of don't stay in the traditional sense of jazz, right?
Well, me being sort of bent towards modern classical music, and I'm trying to be modern, and I'm trying to push the music forward, as well as swing and keep the traditions going. But Richie was a great guy for me because he was all into the modern stuff, and I mean, of course, first lesson he made a point of telling me about all the great pianists from the 50s and before, Tatum and Bud Powell and Wynton Kelly and Bill Evans and Monk and all that. And I knew about these people, but I had a lot to learn at that point. So I had to go back and really listen to this stuff a lot to become rooted in this music, to kind of turn myself into a jazz musician, because I was searching for what I wanted in music. And, obviously I wanted some sophistication because I was going for the modern classical thing. But then when jazz hit my ears, I was like, oh man, this swings. It's got like the earth. It's got like a groove. It's got all the sophistication I'm looking for. So, I just went for it. But Richie was and is great.
And who were some of those the earliest pianists that really you gravitated towards? I mean, I would imagine maybe Bill Evans, since he kind of had that classical type thing going on. I think Herbie Hancock, you said, was a pretty big influence, right?
Right. I call it the big. I mean, if you want to go just to go back to Richie, Richie might have been, if life had gone a certain way, Richie could have been the next guy, like a Herbie or a Chick. But he's still sort of somebody that people in the know kind of know about. He's not a household name like those guys. But yes, Chick. But I would say, yeah, probably Herbie is the closest. I don't know. I just love his sensibility about everything. Well, I don't love everything that Herbie's done, but I love a lot of what he's done. And Herbie, Chick, Keith Jarrett, McCoy, to me, they're the modern piano giants. Uh, and then you throw in like Bill Evans and Thelonious Monk, who are not really as mainstream as the other pianists in the 50s. They deserve a little more something because they're such unique individuals. And, I mean, I could name a bunch of Wynton Kelly and Tommy Flanagan and, people who were around. Tommy Flanagan was around New York when I was there in the 70s, 80s, and, whatever beyond. So there were a lot of influences in there, as well as me when I came to New York getting a good earful of Latin music.
Right, which I want to get into and talk about that because that's kind of where you started your professional career. But before you got to that stage, did you participate in a lot of the jam sessions there in New York? Because I imagine it's one thing to study with somebody and another thing to get out and play with people. Was that important, of getting out there and playing with different people?
Yeah, there was well, I'll say this, the drummer who was my roommate at Oberlin, we both decided to bolt Oberlin and come to New York and seek musical um, our musical fortune or whatever. I don't know. And so at that time, he got a loft on, it was 16th Street or I think it was 18th Street, down around Union Square. And that loft became like a meeting place. Everybody played there all the time. So that was kind of like the home base. I taught at Rutgers for like 12 years, and we designed a curriculum for young kids to come in and almost to do what we did naturally, because we would get up in the morning and, I'd practice and whatever, and then we'd want to play. We'd play all the time, try to play just no money, just go to somebody's call off tunes and write tunes or whatever we were doing. So that was an area where I met a lot of people. I mean, I think of the pianists who were around in those days. It was Jim McNeely, Michael Wolff, Armand Donnellian. There were some others and others too. And some of the instrumentalists who were floating around were like Alex Foster on saxophone, Mike Richmond on bass. He was there. I mean, I think even Jack DeJohnette came down there once. Sometimes we'd have like somebody who was unbelievable. But these guys would show up. I mean, like Mike Brecker might show up. You never know who was just floating around town then. So that was sort of our base. I met a lot of people there to kind of get a career going, but it didn't happen right away because as I said, I needed to learn a lot, and I knew that when I moved to New York. So I wasn't expecting to make money playing in the beginning. I knew I had to grow. So I took like a year or two for me to really start getting to a point where I could eke out a minor living playing music.
That jazz scene, that loft scene, was that the same thing with Dave Liebman and those guys that they did? Was that the same?
It was kind of the same. It was part of that, but those guys are a couple of years older, and that little bit makes a difference. We were a different wave of young guys coming in. But yes, it was part of. I remember Richie and Dave. They had a loft scene called Free Life, so I was involved in that a little bit. So yeah, it kind of all blended together.
And then it looks like you initially got involved playing on the Latin jazz scene and with Mongo Santa Maria, right? And you started touring, and I think you also made an album, right? So how did that all get started?
couple of albums with him. But well, really, my experience with Latin music started before Mongo. A friend of mine was playing with like in a basement band down in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn, which at the time was not as beautiful as it is now. But I went down there and I was intrigued by the music, mostly because, well, I loved the music. I heard it. It had vibrant, the rhythm was happening. And, but I knew Herbie and Chick had both gone through that, that Latin thing, So I said, wow, if it's good enough for them, man, maybe it's good enough for me, to see what that'll do to my playing. So I got started in that band. There was a great bass player, a guy named John Henry Robinson, who's still around, married to Valerie Capers, a pianist, and they play around. And he took me under his wing a little bit just to get me started so I could get some very rudimentary stuff so I could survive playing in a Latin band. And it was survive because I didn't know anything really. And, I learned doonty, doon, doon, doonty, doon, 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 doonty, just a little, they're called montunos, just to be able to play. And so I did that and, got my basic roots together there. And from there, I started playing with some other Latin bands and hearing them all, for a couple of years. And then Mongo called and there was an audition. And I think I got the gig because I had that background already. So, I played with Mongo for 2 years and then on with Dave Valentine and Fort Apache, Jerry Gonzalez. And I just got into the scene, and some great music.
So there's a difference, I've had Vladimir Shafranov on a couple of times, who's a Russian pianist.
Mm-hmm.
And, but he talks about how there's a completely different feel between that Latin playing in that versus kind of that swing of the hard bop stuff. So was it hard to adjust, or was that just something natural that you just kind of felt?
I just went for it. And I kind of feel like I do that in any type, whether I'm playing funk, Latin, anything. I just kind of bring myself to it. I'm okay with the Latin thing kind of influencing my straight ahead thing and vice versa. When I first started playing with this band, I think it was A.B. Cruzy, La Palladium or something like that. I was just hanging there for dear life when it was Montuno time and support. But when they heard me solo, then I could let all my jazz chops in there, and they were like, "Oh, great, 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 great. Okay, we want you." So that kind of gave me some time to kind of learn my rudiments, But I kind of put it all together, and it is different. There's no question about it. It is different. Just like, I'm more known in the Afro-Cuban based Latin jazz, yet later on I played with Astrid Gilberto for maybe 4 years or something like that, with the Brazilian guys in town. And I knew that was very different. I knew I used to play a samba like a Puerto Rican or a Cuban guy, because I didn't really know that music, Then I played with some of the great the Brazilian drummers like the Duca Fonseca or Portinho, and I got to feel what that felt like. And that changed my outlook towards that music, So I feel very fortunate to having gotten in with sort of the real guys.
So that kind of started. So I read that your first album that as a leader was 1978, right? That's
Right.
called Sir. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you make that record? How did that come about?
Well, that came about really three of us. Jeff Pappas on drums, and a guy named Mike Rollins on bass, who I think Jeff has passed, but Mike was also into classical music. I think he's still in Europe doing some kind of classical thing. But we just got together and played every week a couple of times, the three of us. And, I believe in that sort of thing, or I especially believe in it for the younger guys who may not get the opportunity to go right. I mean, I had wonderful opportunities to play with some of the greats in there, but you get together with the best musicians you can, and you play and you make it important. We worked through a lot of original material and stuff like that, so we decided to go into the studio. We did a demo record, whatever you want to call it, and there was a guy named Irv Kratka from Inner City Records at the time, and he heard it, and he decided, yeah, I like this, and he decided to put it out. So there you go.
So how did you? I read that you actually played with Chet Baker, and I think you toured with Sonny Rollins, right? So that how did that come about? How did you meet those guys and get involved with that?
Well, I was playing with Mongo at the time. I was kind of playing with Mongo and Chet at the same time, and
Okay.
which are pretty different kind of situations, but nonetheless both really great. I mean, and then I remember, uh, you get these things from just by knowing people. They hear you play, they think, and this something opens up, and you get a call, and hopefully it works out, or it doesn't. I've been in situations where it doesn't work out too. But I remember Mongo asking me to do a month tour out in California, uh, and Chet asking me to go to Europe with him. I had to make a decision. I don't know if I made the right decision, but people told me, be careful if you go to Europe with Chet. Because Chet, as great a musician as he was known for some other things too. And so being in my 20s, I was not. Now I'd be fine if I was abandoned in Europe, but at that time I was a little nervous, so I went with Mongo, and that ended up lasting for a while. But I certainly loved the time I spent with Chet and getting next to that sensibility. I said it's like the closest I ever got to playing with Miles.
Yeah, incredible player.
Yeah.
Um, but Sonny Rollins, tell us a little bit about that because I heard in reading, I read his biography that came out not long ago, and apparently he was, although he was a pretty open musician to accepting other people. Initially, apparently, he was kind of difficult to play with on stage, and he would kind of go through a lot of musicians eventually. So, how was that playing with him?
Uh, it was great. It was great because I got to know him, and he's a really funny guy. Sonny he has a sense of humor, and that certainly comes out in his music. Um, it was a lot of things. It not only playing with Sonny, but playing with some of the people in the band. I mean, there was a concert. I remember we went back to Oberlin for a concert, and I was playing with Bob Cranshaw, Al Foster, and Sonny. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. You know what I mean? Like, I am 20 some odd, 26, 27, I don't know, and I'm here with these like giants of jazz, three of them. So I remember that concert too. That was a great concert. I wish I had a recording of it. But I enjoyed playing with Sonny a lot. You know, I had to learn how to play with him. And I don't even know if I learned how to play with him. If I were to do it again, I might approach it a little differently because I'd hear, and certainly Sonny let me stretch, and I did what I wanted to. I didn't write for him. I would have loved to have written some tunes for him because it lasted about a year. Um, but you need to play a certain way for Sonny. Sonny'd go off into the stratosphere on his solos, and I'd want to jump out there and go out and go crazy. And in some ways, he needs you to hold the fort a little bit, to stay and not necessarily follow him out there. So that was a little interesting for me as a young lion wanting to, forge my path. I had to pull it back a little bit, but ultimately, a great experience. Anytime you get to play with people
The
like
legend,
that,
yeah. I mean,
I'm just very fortunate. I learned stuff when he'd play solo saxophone on the stage, and some of that stuff was the most amazing stuff you'd ever hear. So
yeah. So copying for him is definitely different than pretty much anybody else, right? Because
much.
yeah, yeah,
You had to be. You could go with him a little bit, but you had to kind of take care of business too, because he wanted to go out. He wanted that tension, I think, a little more of him going out and you kind of holding it. That isn't to say you couldn't respond to him. You can, and we had some great concerts where it was really like that. So I have nothing but really great things to say about Sonny. And if Sonny, if you're watching this, man, I hope you're doing great. Man.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites for sure. I've got a large collection of his records, so he's definitely one of my favorites. And
Right.
yeah, so was he the kind of guy that would kind of tell you what he wanted, or did he expect you to
Not
kind of
really.
like figure it
Not
out?
really. No, no, he wouldn't tell you much. You would just play. I mean, I'll say this. This is one of the most interesting things about when I was working with him. Normally you get in a band, they give you the music, and you play the music, you read the music, and you get comfortable with it. But I remember the first couple of rehearsals, Sonny didn't have any music. He just taught me the tunes. And in a way, that was great because it got right out of the reading part, and you had it internalized. So it was really like you eliminated a whole step of looking at the page. You just like, okay, I got it now. It's in me. Um, I've read things like that with like Monk. Like Sonny would go over to Monk's house and they would learn tunes, and Monk would just show himself on the piano. And I thought maybe he learned that kind of thing, or maybe it just happened that way at those rehearsals with us. I don't know, but it was different. It was great.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. The difference between having sheet music, having the charts, right, or having the tunes memorized. Because I hear a lot from different musicians, on especially those that have been around for a while, how when you went to play with somebody, whether it was a jam session or whatever, you were expected to know a certain repertoire, and you were where nowadays a lot of people are bringing their phones up, reading the music off of that, or bringing sheet music in. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, as a composer, I understand. I listen. I write music out for people to play and all that, so that's important. But at some point, when you give up the music and you have it memorized, and of course you do have to, there is a repertoire to know, so that if you just want to play a night of standards, everybody can get together on enough tunes. I mean, what's different now is that they have on the iPads or whatever, you got things where you can just press a button and it transposes for you and everything.
Right.
Very, very valuable if you're working with a singer. I remember we didn't have that luxury, so the singer would just call the tune off in whatever key, and you'd sink or swim. Most of the time, I'd swim, but there I remember sinking a couple of times. And the singer would look back at me. I said, "All right, I got to find this. I've never played this tune in the key of B. Like give me a break here." So but whatever. But it was good training, to kind of get to play tunes in different keys. So knowing that a certain amount of jazz repertoire is important, but as a composer, which is really important to me because I came at this as a musician, as a composer first before I decided I wanted to be a player. The composition thing really matters to me a lot. Um, you have to. If I present music to people, yeah, they read it, and then ideally, we go on the road for a week or two, and then everybody can throw the music away and start playing it. But the opportunities to do that are not so great, to take a band on the road for a week or two. So, I know that there's a difference. There's a difference when you have it memorized. But, if you're really on it and you're a professional, you can come up with it while you're reading and play something extremely valid. So it can work.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about you. So after you did the Latin scene for quite a while, right?
Right.
Then what?
A couple
You
of
also
years.
did a lot. You've done like 18, I think 18 records I read. So it was, as a solo artist,
Yeah, I
or
don't
something
know.
like that. But
Something in that zone, yeah.
and there's
Get
a lot of different types of music. And leading up to this one that's sitting here next to me, which just came out a few months ago.
right.
Um, so tell us a little bit about your leading up to this record, which we're talking, quite a few years there.
Well, yeah. I mean, I got into the Latin scene and as well. So I've always been in the Latin scene and the jazz scene. That's always been, a big part of my life. Not to say I haven't done other kind of gigs. We all have, but those are the two main things. So I'd say in my records, you'd have a combination of that. I call myself, one record I called that I did for Savant was called Jazz Latin, I called it that because I wanted the jazz to be first as opposed to Latin jazz. Because to me, I'm a jazz player first, the Latin player that came in afterwards, as opposed to somebody like, oh, like Eddie Palmieri. Eddie taught at, I got to know him teaching at Rutgers. He did some teaching there too. Eddie's a Latin player, and the jazz thing comes, I think, maybe a little secondary. But I mean, he's great. He's great, but he's a great musician. That's all you got to really know. So. All my records have sort of a combination of that thing. I had some of the Latin jazz all stars records for Savant, a bunch. That was a thing I kept together for a while. I had a bassless trio with Dave Valentine. It was just Valentine, Richie Flores, and myself. That was really, I don't know if you heard any of those records. What a different, and that came out of us doing a gig somewhere, and I don't know, we couldn't get it. Well, I guess we could, but they wanted percussion. But we didn't have enough money to hire a bass player. So I said, okay, we'll do it. We'll see what happens. And it was so cool because without a bass player, it kind of freed me up harmonically and stuff so I could play the tumbao, the bass part, or Richie could do more of that. And I could go harmonically in different places. And so we said, oh, we got to do something with this. So we did a couple. I did one with Dave. I think it was triple play. And then we did another one where it was Richie Flores, myself, with Dave Valentine, Paquito de Rivera, and Dave Samuels, each fronting Richie and myself. So that was really those are kind of slightly revolutionary records. I don't know how many people heard them, but they're conceptually very interesting. And I think they sound pretty good too. But, so as well as doing my own records, I was doing records with Dave Valentine too for, the GRP label back in the day. So we did a lot of recordings and for other labels. So, I've always been in both worlds, and this particular record is really nice for me because there are some tunes that have a little bit of a Latin thing to it, like a Maiden Voyage. At the end, I'd play a Montuno for Billy Hart to do his thing. But again, I wanted to hear Billy, what he would do behind a Montuno. Because Billy's not like a Latin player, but he certainly has heard the music and appreciates it. So I wanted to hear it. I want to hear something different, and he does it. It's great. It's swinging. K-Man on this record I wrote while I had a gig down in the Cayman Islands. So it's got a little bit of that island vibe. But for the most part, this is a jazz record. We're swinging and we're doing some stuff. And I was very happy to have the opportunity to do just a jazz record, and that's really what this is about.
How did you come into contact with Simon in JoJo Records? Because all the stuff they're putting out is fantastic, musically as well as how it's recorded.
He's doing things first class. We recorded at Rudy Van Gelder's legendary studio, and I met Simon. What was it? Simon and through Santi DiBriano, who I've known for the past number of years. We played together a lot, and Santi. I think Simon came down to hear us, and I was playing with Santi in the city, and Simon said, "Hey, I'd love to record Bill sometime." So there we go.
Yeah, and then you already had Billy Hart in mind, or did Simon suggest? Because I know these guys play on a lot of their records.
Billy's on a few of them, but no, Billy and I would play there. Billy and I met years ago playing with the late, great Janet Lawson, vocalist, who I did a few records with. And then we met again. I was touring in Italy, and the guy who brought me over said, "Oh, we have a free night, I want you to do a trio gig." And there was a bass player guy named Phil Palumbi with us, great bass player. And I said, "Well, who do you got for me on drums?" He said, "Oh, we got Billy Hart." I said, "Billy Hart? I mean, you couldn't get anybody better than that?" I mean, it's like, they got me like the best drummer on earth for, I'm in the middle of Italy and I'm saying, wow, Billy Hart is the guy. So Billy and I reconnected there, and really I've kind of been trying to play with him ever since, whenever the opportunity presents itself, because really I think Billy's a national treasure. He brings so much listening and history to the table that I really, you know, when we do gigs, I tell them, I tell the audience, uh, every time I play with this guy is a special event, and I really feel that.
Yeah. So how? Tell us about the Van Gelder experience. Is this your first time recording there? Or have you been there before? Have you? Because I always hear about this. Everybody loves to record there, obviously for, the whole Blue Note thing. But
Yeah, I had recorded there. I did a record for CTI. I think it was like around '93 or something like that. I remember that because that's the year my daughter was born. I think it's '93. I have three boys and one daughter. Thank God I got the daughter in the last one. But the yeah, so we recorded there. But before that, I had played there, recorded there with the late great Charles Fambro. He was a very good friend and colleague, and what a great musician. Um, so from that experience, Creed said, "Hey, let's do a record." So that's when Rudy was still in the booth and working. Yeah, so I had that experience in the early '90s, and that was interesting. I could talk about that a little bit because
yeah, sure.
we had the record's called Lost Voices on the CTI label.
Let's check
Um,
that out.
yeah, and
Right.
yeah, I mean it's a nice, it's kind of a trio record, but it's got some little synths in the back and percussion. So it's not this record we did for Simon. It's just trio, nothing else. But so we're there. I think I had Charles was playing. Ricky Sebastian was a great drummer who was in New York but moved to New Orleans. Has lived down there for a while. Um, I'm rehearsing the band, just getting the tunes together a little bit. Maybe we had a rehearsal before, but I'm rehearsing the band. And Rudy comes out to me and said, "Bill, this is a recording studio, not a rehearsal studio." I'm like, "Oh." I'm just trying to get the music together so we make a nice recording in your recording studio. And but it took me back because I'm like, yeah, this is Rudy Van Gelder, and I'm like, well, this is, I hadn't really done much there. So I went up to Creed and I said, "Creed, what's going on here, man? I mean, I know Rudy's like legendary and everything, but I'm trying to make a record here." And he said, "Bill, don't worry about it. Just do what you got to do, and I'll take care of it." So Rudy and I kind of, the first day we recorded 2 days. First day, not so great, and he had just gotten this 9-foot Steinway in there, which I was playing, which was a beautiful piano, and it's also the one that I recorded 30 years later on this record. Um, so the second day we got there, we did something the first day. I don't really know what we did the first day because the vibes were so off the wall. Um, but the second day we got there, we kind of had it together. We had rehearsed, everybody was like ready to go, and we pretty much did the whole record the second day. The second day, everything went great. Rudy and I became friends. It's like he loved the music, and everything has a happy ending. but but it was interesting there for a little while.
So pretty much after that second day, you pretty much play the song once or twice. If you got to
Yeah,
pick the best
and
take thing and
right,
go.
and it went really smooth. And Creed was a nice buffer there between us, and we were good. We were good, and Rudy, he got a great sound on the piano. I think at that point it was probably the best, nicest sound I had had on a record, and I loved him too. I said, "Oh man, this piano sounds great, man. Thank you." So
So he pretty much just stayed in the control room. You guys played. He'd let you know if you like to take, or you guys like to take, and you just
whether
move
he,
on.
yeah, it was a very smooth day. As the first day was rocky, the
The
second day
second day.
was just the opposite. So all's well that ends well. I think the record came out very nice. Creed told me at that time that year I had done 2 CDs, one for a label called Blue Moon Mesa and one for CTI. And I thought to myself, "Oh man, I'm on top of the world here. Look at this. I got 2 record labels that are going to want to keep me going." And of course, Creed took out an ad in the New York Times, the back page of the New York Times for my record. I was like, wow, this is great. Creed is like, he said, Bill, in 6 months, your career is going to be in another place. Well, it didn't happen that way. The record was good and did all right, but between him and Blue Moon Mason, I thought I was going to be in a great position. Neither one hooked up for a second record, and that was the end of that. But it was nice while it lasted.
So how is that different than going in the studio now with I think Andreas Mayer and one of his colleagues? Because I think he said I think he did the mixing on this, maybe in the mastering.
Andreas did he did the mixing and a little bit of editing and the mastering. We recorded a Rudy with Maureen Van Sickler. She was the engineer. It was great. It was great. I mean, but this was more, doing this record was more like a regular record. I didn't have that amazing Rudy Van Gelder like overseeing it. This is my studio. You're lucky to be recording.
Right.
I came in, the artist. I did it. I talked to the guys. If we didn't get it right, we straightened it out, and we just did the record like it is most of the time.
Right. So you wrote most of the tunes on here. I think you did 2 covers on here, which is Maiden Voyage you did, and then you did 3 Little Words. The rest of these are your own songs, right?
I Hear Rhapsody is also on there. That's a cover.
Okay. That's not on the vinyl version.
Right. Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
It was right on the CD. I Hear Rhapsody is on there. Yeah, like I said, I might be a writer first, almost. I think of myself as a writer, but I shouldn't really. I've worked very hard to become a player, to do all that. So I do both. But yeah, I'm very happy with that record. I think everybody played great.
Tell us a little bit about the. Oh, go ahead.
No, I think writing is something, people don't talk about that as much though. When you read record reviews, they don't really talk about your writing as much as your playing, which is, I wish they would.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah, because these are great tunes on here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Tell us about your songwriting process, because you've got Touch, which is kind of a laid back thing. I really like the Round and Round, which you kind of have the change of tempos, and that's really cool.
Well, I could talk about both those tunes a little bit, because each tune has a little story to it. Touch, it was a sort of a rework of an idea I had for a song quite a few years ago. And also, I got to give Simon credit. I wasn't going to start the record with that, but he said, no, start the record. Because I've never started the record with kind of a ballad, and it's got kind of a ballad feel to it. But I thought it was nice. When I listened to the whole thing as a whole, it's nice to kind of introduce you to the record, and then we get going. But it's kind of got a little bluesy feel to it.
Yeah.
But it's got some depth to it. So it was nice to rework an old idea, kind of get those changes going, and figure out how the melody would fit in. As far as Around and Around goes, the process is sometimes different. I could be just screwing around at the piano, and then I stumble across something that I feel like I can develop into a song, or I can be walking down the street, a melody hits me or a groove hits me or something, I want to develop that. Or once I dreamed, well, I shouldn't say once, twice I've dreamed, had a dream about it. So I had a dream about one tune that I ended up playing with Mongo, but we didn't record it. And then I dreamed like the arrangement of I Hear Rhapsody, which is not on the album. It's on the CD. I heard Dave Samuel's band playing that in my dream. And I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is my dream. This is my arrangement, And so I got up in the morning and I started working I Hear Rhapsody in a different kind of way. But getting back to Around and Around, I had this little idea, and then I wrote this bridge to it. And miraculously, when I came back to the bridge, I went back to my original idea, and it all just like fit together. It was just like, wow. It's almost like a gift from God, that this worked out like that. I was saying, that's really nice.
Yeah, I like that the way you've got that. It's kind of laid back, and then it kind of hits and speeds up, and
Right.
I think
And then
that's really cool. Yeah, I really that's one of my favorite tracks on the
kind of,
record.
yeah, it's kind of got that Latin 6/8, and then we do a subdivision of something to get into up tempo straight ahead thing, So
And when you're doing those tracks in the studio, do you have the sheet music there so everybody at least knows the basic arrangement, or is it
yeah.
you guys already?
Well, I mean, it's half and half. I've been working the tunes, but yeah, they're looking at the tunes. I don't know if Billy's looking at the tunes. Billy,
You just feeling it?
I think he's going for it. He'd rather play without the music and just hear it. And he's got such great ears that he can hear it after you play it a couple of times. So yeah, we're pretty much just going for it. So
And then Maiden Voyage, so that you picked that. Obviously, you're a huge Herbie Hancock
yeah,
fan.
well,
So
everybody knows Maiden Voyage. I actually did a totally different arrangement of that. We did on one of Conrad Herwig's Latin side. I think it was the Latin side of Herbie Hancock. So I did an arrangement of a Maiden Voyage that was really different. I added a lot of different chords to it. This one we kind of made it a little wider, a little more open, I should say. Didn't need the dun 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 dun. Just went with the chords and kind of left it open for Billy to do whatever he wants and Santi to do whatever he wanted. Kind of just went for it on the session. That's the kind of thing I say. Okay, we got this little open idea to try this, and we just tried it. And I want to go to a little Montuno at the end for Billy, and let's see what happens. And what happened was pretty nice.
Yeah, really, yeah, that's great. A great rendition of it for sure.
Yeah, it was fun.
So was this pretty much in and out? Is this one day?
2 days.
2 days. And so how many takes of these? Was it just one or two takes again and just?
Yeah, one or two takes, and that was it. Usually first takes are the one. I mean, I've always found that generally, but sometimes the second take is it. So but we didn't need much more than that for any of this stuff. And I should say we recorded one of Santi's tunes too, El Yunque, and dedicated to the rainforest in Puerto Rico. And Santi's a great writer as well as a great bass player. And that's really, I appreciate that. For my writing sensibility. Sort of, I've told him it kind of reminds me of Charles Fambro in that way. Fambro was a great writer as well as bass player too. But he wrote this beautiful tune in 7, and it's really very ethereal. But yes, it's got just had a nice vibe to it. So I was happy to record that too.
And how do you feel about this coming out on vinyl? Because that's pretty cool. You got a lot of people now that are back into vinyl. So
yeah, I'm thrilled, man. In fact, I don't have a record player yet. I'm having it delivered today.
Oh, are you?
I have. I don't know if I should mention what I know. I think you on your thing you mentioned you have a Fluence table.
I do.
Right. I was thinking about that. I ended up getting a Project.
Oh yeah, those are great too.
Yeah, table. So I'm gonna set that up hopefully later today. And
oh, nice.
Throw the vinyl on.
Do you have a record collection at all, or do you collect records over the years?
Of course I did. But one of my sons has it in his house, so I've kind of given it to him, and he bought a little turntable. But I'm going to tell him, all right, you keep them all, but we'll think if you keep the library, I'll steal a few every now and then. I'll keep like 10 here or something, and then I'll bring them back and take, sort of get back into my vinyl a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. I think it was a big deal. I did a gig at Dizzy's, the jazz club in New York last year, and after I held up the vinyl and I said, oh man, this is really exciting for me, to do a record that they've done in vinyl after all these years. At the end of the set, we sold so many people came up and wanted vinyl. It was amazing. I mean, we sold some CDs too, but really, I hope it's a shot in the arm for the music business, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely still not what it was back in the 70s, obviously, but certainly has made a pretty big comeback over the last 15 years or so,
Yeah.
maybe a little longer.
Yeah, and you hear it, you know, it is a warmer sound. It's different. I remember when we went to the digital sound, everybody, that was a little harsh. Now all our you know, our ears are used to the digital sound, but the vinyl always, the analog vinyl, it always was a warmer sound, and you know, I like that.
Yeah, and of course, now the digital technology's improved
It
a
has.
lot since it's
Oh
come
yeah,
out.
you're right. CDs still can sound great. They can,
Yeah,
but
especially if the person knows how to get the sound they're looking for. That's the big thing. That you know, a lot of people now. I'd interviewed Simon Phillips on here before, who, of course, a big drummer, but also he does a lot of recording. And Andreas Mayer, and they talk about you can get the sound, the warm sound on digital if you know what you're listening for. You're not used to getting the, you know, on digital you can get really heavy bass, or you can get, you
right,
know, a little bit more dynamic range. But if you know what you're listening for, you can get a really nice sound. So,
we're gonna have to
but
do
this
that.
sounds fantastic. They do such a great job. And again, Andreas Mayer, he's been around for a long time. He's done a lot of classical stuff, and whenever he
Right.
mixes and masters, they sound fantastic. So
Yeah,
this is
no,
a phenomenal sounding record.
well, I appreciate that. I think yeah, they did a great job. My latest project, hopefully, which will see the light of day, I just recorded a solo piano thing, and we were actually I have a Steinway A in my house, and you know, which has been done. It's a beautiful piano. So we brought a friend of mine has this amazing recording equipment, and we brought it in here. So I'm hopeful that maybe you'll see that at the end of the year or something.
Oh, cool.
Come out. Just you know, different kind of record for me. You know, definitely not a Latin jazz record.
Are you gonna
Not
try?
really, almost not even a. It's a jazz record, but it's solo piano. I a lot of ballads and different kind of vibe to it. But I'm looking forward to people hearing that side of me.
Interesting. So is that going to be? Are you going to get that done on vinyl as well, or is that just going to be CD at this time, or do you
I'm
know?
not sure. I'm not sure. You know, we're gonna. You know, I'm hopeful that you know, perhaps we'll hook up with Simon on this. We'll see what happens. You know.
Yeah, that'd be great because it's important when you if you have a solo piano record like you're talking about that it's pressed on a
Oh,
really
it's
good quiet vinyl, and they always do a good job with that.
yeah. That's got
And
to be the recording. I've you know I've heard the recording. We recorded it with you know some unbelievable mics and everything. So it's the recording of the piano is really great. But you're right. It has to be for a record like you need that serious quality. It's because some of it approaches. It's sort of a melding of classical jazz, and it's got that classical kind of vibe to it. With of course I'm improvising, but yeah, you need that pristine piano sound, and well, that's the only way it's going to happen. I'll make sure of
yeah,
that.
let's talk a little bit about education because you are involved in education. Also, I want to talk a little bit about your writing because you do write about jazz, and you've won some Writer of the Year awards from
No,
this,
no,
right?
I don't write about jazz. Maybe that's somebody else's
Oh, it
bio.
has on there that you were for the on one of your things that said that you had done some of the Writer of the Year awards.
Well,
Uh,
Writer of the Year award is as a composer.
for the CSAC European Stage and Authors and Composer. Okay, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I really said it already in terms of writing being very important to me, writing and arranging. Uh, I mean that's sort of the pianist's role in any band in some ways. But like for example with Conrad Herwig, we've done all these Latin side of Herbie Hancock, the Latin side of I don't know if you're familiar with those records. The Latin side of Horace Silver, the Latin side of Joe Henderson. I think Joe Labano was a featured guest on that. And I did a lot of the arranging. We take all the classic tunes from those guys and sort of put them in a Latin context. So I did some arranging there for Valentine's records all through the years. I was always writing a lot of his material. Um, so I've done that for a lot of artists, and that's a big part of what I do. So the award in CSAC, they just recognized, I don't know, they recognize that that I did something there. I mean, a funny thing is I was nominated for a Grammy a few years ago.
Oh yeah, I saw that for instrumental arrangement.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you've gone through a lot of wonderful things I've done in my career. Well, I've done this. I did this record, and I have another record. It just came out with a drummer named Rich Barada on the Savant label, and we did. I did a lot of arrangements of tunes from the '60s, like the rock tunes that we all know and love, and I've sort of jazzified them in Latin. I think it's really an interesting record. Um, But the Grammy thing came about on one of his records. He was a film producer. Rich is and then he was a drummer too. But he put his drumming career on hold while he had a family and got into film producing and made a living. So he was a film producer on the movie Big. Do you remember that movie with Tom Hanks?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Big, right? And so they have this one scene in FAO Schwartz with Tom Hanks and I forget the other actor. Robert Loggia, is that him? I don't know. They do chopsticks on a big keyboard. They dance it on a keyboard that's on the floor. And Rich said to me, Bill, do you think you could do a arrangement of chopsticks or something that we would like to play? And I came up with this Latin jazz version of chopsticks. And lo and behold, they nominated that arrangement for a Grammy. I was shocked. An arrangement of chops. I mean, listen,
Yeah.
Vincent Herring's playing saxophone on the record. Great saxophone player. And Vincent said to me, well, Bill, you know it's a great arrangement. So I said, okay. All right, Vince, if you say, I mean, I liked it, but it got his stamp of approval. And so they nominated me for a Grammy on that. I didn't win, but
Hey, yeah.
it's nice to get the nomination anyway. So you never know when somebody's going to recognize you for something. It's always nice. There are a lot of worthy artists out there to be recognized. So, take it for what it's worth.
What about jazz education? Tell us a little bit about that, about your involvement in that. And...
I've always, I think when you're a serious musician, teaching is always going to be part of your career. So I taught at Rutgers for 13 years. I gave it up a few years ago. I lived out at the end of Long Island in Montauk, New York. Decided, I had done enough there. But before Rutgers, I had taught privately for many years and done things. And teaching's great. I like doing it. I'm not doing too much of it now. I did a lot before. There's my dog, and maybe you hear him in the back as we wind it down. But I like teaching, and I had a lot of great students at Rutgers. The faculty at Rutgers is great, still is. Orrin Evans came in after me. He's teaching there now. I came in after Stanley Cowell. I had also taught at Rutgers for a semester when Kenny Barron was teaching there. Kenny took us, I think, right before Stanley Cowell took over. I taught there. So after Stanley decided he wanted to leave, it was sort of a natural thing for me to jump in. But I like it, and plus the fact you meet these some great up and coming young musicians, and then you hang with the faculty. The faculty at Rutgers is great. Ralph Bowen and Dave Stryker and Kenny Davis, Conrad Herwig, and Robbie Amin, Victor Lewis. The faculty concerts are great.
Do you also do private lessons now, or is that something that people can take online with you? Or
I have right now. I just have one student, out here, and I'd be open to a few more. But yeah, and at Rutgers I was teaching not just piano, jazz piano, but I was teaching improv and arranging and all these things on the graduate and the undergraduate and some on the graduate level too. So I was sort of whatever they needed, I could jump in and do. But it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. How do you feel about the state of jazz now? As far as there's a lot of great players, a lot of talented players. I think. Would you say jazz education is probably at a high point as far as in the classroom type of study. Do you think that
And
there's something missing on the ground
yeah,
level?
it's an interesting question. I mean, like I said, we kind of did it all ourselves in the '70s. My friend had a loft, and we just decided to play, and we did it. The guys that came up beforehand, in the jam sessions, and just sort of the school of hard knocks in a way. You learn, you get a great teacher, and you just play with people, and you develop your style. Is there sort of I've said sometimes, if Thelonious Monk auditioned for Rutgers, would we let him in? I don't know. His style was so strange that we might have all gone like, I'm not sure about this. I hope we would have. I mean, my God. But uh, there are, there are good things and bad things. I mean, I think, yeah, I'd like to make students aware that, the greats in this music do have their own style. They have their own voice. They have, and that's what you're searching for, really. You're searching for that. Of course, somebody like Chet Baker, for example. Chet wasn't a great reader. He could read, but he wasn't like, a crack reader like, a lot of these kids come out of school doing, and they should come out of school being able to read pretty well, because you don't get that jazz gig, but you get a Broadway gig or something. You need to be able to do that. You want to be able to make a living. Um, but is it the be all end all? Not necessarily. All the education, there's another way to do it that maybe we have lost something a little bit. In terms of coming up and uh, just I'm not coming up in a different way and not in a school environment where maybe there is a homogenization of everybody a little bit. I think I heard Ron Carter once say something. I only played with Ron once on a record with Nina Freelon, the vocalist, who's really nice. A nice record called "Listen." Check that one out if you. It was early in the. I think it was around the '90s too. It probably came out on vinyl too. It was on Columbia Records, right when records were still selling, but starting to, when the business was starting to change. Anyway, I think Ron said something like, I don't know if he missed the age of apprenticeship or something like that. It was like, there is an apprenticeship, and maybe that was more what it was like in the old days. You play with the great, older musicians, and you learn that way, as opposed to studying with some of the great older musicians. I don't know. There are pros and cons to each way, I suppose. This is just how it's evolved. And are we in a golden age of music in terms of colleges? I don't know. There are a lot of music programs now. I think they're all changing. I think you have to be, in this day and age, you have to be a well-rounded musician. For one, you want to be able to make a living. If you can make a living in this,
That's the big question, right?
right. You want to
That's
be able to. It is a big question, and the only reason to do this is because you love to do it and you have to do it because it's in your heart and you have to do it. It was probably the only reason anyone ever should have done it. Because I've talked to my friend out here who also lives at Randy Brecker lives out here in my neighborhood. And Randy, I talked to him about it a little. Randy says, yeah, it wasn't easy when we were coming up either. It never was easy to make a living as a musician. Maybe it's harder now. There are more people who want to do it. It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
But the more rounded you are, and look at me, I'm a jazz guy, but I was open enough. I didn't start a jazz guy. I started out listening to, I was listening to pop music. I liked Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention and the Dead and all that. I went through that phase in high school. Then I got into modern classical music and all this stuff. But I was searching. Uh, the wider you can be, I think the better off you are. I let Latin music come. I'm an O'Connell, but I let Latin music come into me, and be part of me, and for that to become part of who I am. Uh, and I encourage people to, students, musicians, to embrace other kinds of music and let that influence their musical concepts, because you just never know how you're going to put it together, how that's going to make you who you are. I think it makes everything richer if you let it all in.
All right. Well, that's interesting thoughts there. Before we go, I want to ask you for a list of essential Latin jazz albums, because I think it's something that a lot of people probably aren't, as far as people listening to jazz music, it's probably not on the top of the list, like Kinda Blue, Bill Evans, all these famous albums. What would you give a list of essential listening for maybe Latin jazz albums for people that want to get?
Well, rather than albums, I think I'd just rather go artists.
Sure.
And I mean, the people certainly check out Dave Valentine's records that I'm on, Wongo's records.
Right.
They were, there's some commercial stuff on the GRP records, but there's a lot of hardcore playing too. Paquito's great,
Lee Rivera, yeah.
It brings his sensibility. As far as there's a lot out there. Tito Puente, Eddie Palmieri,
Beto Barbary, right?
Gato. Well, I worked with Gato Barbieri for a number of years. Then you have everybody on the, so you have the Afro-Cuban side, and then you have the Brazilian side with Astrid, and I'm more Afro-Cuban, so I can't really tell you, all of the Brazilians you should listen to, but there are many. And I would also say, they're just like in jazz, there are roots in all this music. So you can go back and listen to like Buena Vista Social Club. Those people.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it?
That's great. And that's all the roots. My thing was experiential. I just got thrust into the Latin world, and I had to hold on for dear life to play in the beginning. And then I'd go to clubs and we'd play maybe 2 or 3 venues a night, and they'd each have 3 bands, and I'd hear all these bands playing, so it got into my ears, But there's certainly roots to all this music, like Celia Cruz, great vocalist. There's roots to this music that need to be checked out, as well as going to the people who have turned it into a Latin jazz, into an art form,
Yeah, so, I think maybe the most popular one may be Monty Alexander.
Right. Yeah, brought his like island thing to it. That's another influence. Like I worked with a guy named John Lucien. He was a great vocalist from St. Thomas, and he brought that to the music too. So yeah, that's what I mean. You just be open to all this stuff, and hopefully you get some opportunities. And the other thing I would say to my students, and it kind of gets back to my first record in 1978, make what you're doing important to you. So if you're playing with, whoever you're playing with, make it important. Play the music as best you can, and see where it takes you, because you don't know. You don't know. But if you take it seriously, then you got a shot of other people taking it seriously.
All right. Well, thank you for hanging out and having this great conversation. I could go on for hours. I know you've got other things to do, but hopefully we'll have you back on when your other album hopefully comes out, or whenever you want to come back on. I'm always happy to have you.
I don't know. We got some sun. The sun is coming down on me right now, but whether it's a solo project or who knows what comes out next.
Yeah.
I'd love to come back and talk about that, Matthew. That'd be great.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and sign off here.
All right. Okay. Take it easy.